Hi, welcome back to Work Truck Record Reviews. Thanks for watching. So here we are. This is the Beatles episode. I tried to avoid it. The gravitational pull was too great. There's a lot of Beatles content out there. People that are a lot better at it than I am, and it's specifically parlogram auctions. Andrew guy is really good. Gear There and Everywhere is a great nerdy channel. Abigail DeVoe is one of my favorite Vinyl Mondays is her things, and she deep dives the Beatles from time to time. So we're not going to listen to any Beatles music because it gets flagged by YouTube and copyrighted, hassles or whatever. So I was going to go over some stuff. I couldn't resist some Beatle thoughts. After Heather and I got our turntable cleaned up and our receiver working, it was kind of spotty and needed some attention, and started cleaning up our old vinyl collection and going through and organizing that. And that was a dream come true for a Virgo like me, just to sort through all that stuff and clean stuff up. I have a decent Beatle collection. I'd never spent much time considering mono versus stereo. Okay, so there's plenty of content on YouTube about mono pressings and versus stereo and UK versus US releases. Now, I've been sucked into that rabbit hole and started visiting record stores again. I picked up an older copy of Yesterday and Today. You can tell by the little file under that it's an older one. So yeah, I was thinking maybe it's a butcher cover, right? But there's no V-neck here. There's no steaming, which is a relief. I wouldn't want to go through all that. But I thought it'd be cool to listen to an older copy. And what I did not know was that this is a mono version. See, with the T, and it says high fidelity instead of full dimensional stereo. So I never paid attention to any of that. My first go round of collecting, and the way I discovered that it was mono was I was listening to it, and What Goes On, at the end of What Goes On, there's conspicuously missing is George's little riff, and it's not there. I was like, is there something wrong with this record, or something wrong with my needle? I messaged this Jerry Hammack guy, and you might be familiar with Jerry Hammack. He's written some books, and we got some mutual friends on Facebook. I wasn't aware of him, but I just straight up asked him, like, what's the deal with this? He's like, oh, you have a mono pressing, and the mono mix is different. And I'm like, oh wow, I had no clue that they were. I just thought they just sounded different, mono versus stereo, but there's differences, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about my history as a Beatles fan, going way back to the beginning. I was born a year after the Beatles broke up. So in 1978, I was 6.5, and there was a confluence of events that year. So just discovering this album pretty hard. Meet the Beatles, 14 years after it came out. But the movie I Want to Hold Your Hand came out that summer, and we're going to see that at the Liberty Theater in Haley, Idaho. So I was, my stepmom had this record from when she was a kid. Also that summer, up at Ketchum at Chapter One bookstore, this book was purchased for me, updated 1978. So this is basically a book that goes through all the, I think it's it was printed in England. It goes through all the UK releases, and it's a nice big picture book, pretty much, of every album. Little blurbs about each album. Little nice big pictures too. It's a paperback, but it's in pretty good shape from owning it for that long. That was pretty cool. And then that Christmas, some of my dad's friends got me this book, which is falling apart. Alan Alda's Illustrated Beatles. This is the one that has all the really trippy illustrations and photographs. And a lot of it is kind of inappropriate for children. There's a lot of nudity in here. You might be familiar with Alan Aldridge. He did the Who's cover of A Quick One. He's got that certain style of airbrush artwork. And I've seen, so on the inside of the Falling Apart cover, it says Merry Christmas 1978. I don't know if you can read that, from Nan and Riley. Anyway, so this was a book that I was pouring through the illustrated lyrics at a very young age with very inappropriate graphics. So I was also, in the first grade and just starting to read. And one of the things I was reading instead of C. Dick Run was this, In His Own Right, Spaniard in the Works. And this is the copy my mom owned that I still own today. It's a reprint paperback from 1967. This nice Peño font that I was kind of crazy about. When I was a little kid, I didn't understand that this cartoon of John on the cover, he's holding a pen, like an ink pen, like a guitar. But for some reason, I thought it was some kind of instrument. I thought it was the instrument that was responsible for some of the weird sounds I was hearing on Beatles records. And we had some of these other kind of fan little paperback books around the house that were kind of cool that I still have. Here's another one, all about the Beatles. Like, have you read these like cheap things that came out in '64? They are, heavy on cool pictures and stuff, but very limited on accuracy or good facts. But they're kind of cool. I was, of course, into Meet the Beatles, and then the actual Bible of that time period was the Red and the Blue albums, obviously. So when I was growing up at my mom's house in Pocatello, we had this one and the blue one. And then this guy here was sort of the oddball, this VJ copy of Songs, Pictures, and Stories. And we'll get to that one in a minute. So I was listening, we had the Red and Blue albums, that one, Abbey Road, and the White Album. The White Album I kind of shied away from. It's pretty scary for a little kid. At least it was to me. It's really spooky. It's like a haunted house or something. There's just too many weird, erratic noises and things happening, and it's it's spooky. It's not as accessible as other records, and even Sgt. Pepper was kind of spooky to me a little bit. So sometime in this time period, 78, 79, I can't remember when I saw the really terrible Bee Gees movie with Peter Frampton, Sgt. Pepper's. I get it conflated with the Muppet movie that came out around the same time because of all the celebrity cameos that appear. But for some reason, that terrible movie with the Bee Gees gave me all this imagery to put together with Abbey Road, because they had all these little live action sequences to those songs. And for a little kid, it was like, oh, this is, these are what those songs look like. Unfortunately, that kind of stuck with me for a bit. I haven't seen that movie since. I've always been curious to kind of hate watch it or whatever. But I'm sure it's god awful. I'm sure it's just terrible, and probably not worth the revisit. 1980 comes along. I'm in 4th grade. John Lennon's murdered, and I went to school that morning that I found out, and told the girl sitting next to me, my favorite Beatle died today. And she says, "What, did somebody step on him?" As a fourth grader would do. Pretty sick burn, right? It's pretty funny now. I didn't think it was funny then, but so that December, I remember going back and spending Christmas with my dad and hearing Beatles 65 for the first time. That was a cool new discovery. That's such a cool record with the first 3 songs. No Reply, I'm a Loser, Babies in Black. I just remember that was a real, wow. I'd never, none of those songs are on the Red album. And it just, my stepmom was in the mood to pull out some Beatle records, and it was one that was brand new to me. It's just, it'll always be in that time period. 1982, I remember in Pocatello, the radio station was broadcasting Beatles at the Beeb, which, 13 years later was released on CD as the BBC sessions. But my mom recorded it on cassette, and I had that cassette for a long time. And it was a little choppy, where she pushed pause and record and through to get out the commercials and stuff. But that was pretty cool having that cassette, and it was I was grateful that all those songs were eventually released on CD in the 90s, because I thought I have no idea where that tape ended up. It's buried somewhere, but it was cool to have and what that tape had that the CDs didn't have was this Pop Go the Beatles kind of little theme song. And I didn't know that they broadcast that whole program in England in 1982. I found this out from the Parlogram Auctions episode, and I'm baffled as to why it was broadcast in Pocatello, Idaho. I'd be curious to know if anybody anywhere else in America heard it broadcast in that time period. So around 1983, I'm learning how to play guitar at 11 and a half. And Christmas of 83, I got this book, which is just sheet music, The Complete Beatles. This is my copy from 41 years ago. And it is, as you can see, dog-eared, the perfect binding, just completely disintegrated because I was cracking this wide open to learn chords. This is basically the book that taught me how to play guitar. Just me reading the chord charts to all their early stuff. This is from 62 to 66. This volume 2 is still in really good shape. It's totally together because I never bothered to learn songs from Revolver onward because they were too difficult. Like it didn't occur to me that I could just play those songs on a guitar, because most of them from that point going forward are piano, mellotron, brass sections, strings, horn, great songs, but it doesn't occur to me like I'm just going to learn campfire chords, to play a regular song. So maybe that's why so much of my Roof Broker songs are so Beatle chordy. That from learning the keys to all that, basics, early early stuff based in country, western, and rhythm and blues stuff. So we'll get back to this as a reference point. Back to the record collecting. Oh, so between the years 84 and 85 is when I filled out the rest of the missing Beatle collection. So I got a lot of, in my vinyl collection, I have a lot of those purple labels of the Capitol releases from the late 70s or early 80s. And I haven't gone on Discogs and did the matrix numbers and figured out exactly which ones I have. But my guess is the copies that I filled my collection up with are from around 78 to 81, because I just used my allowance money or whatever to fill in my collection up till around 1985. We have a family friend that has some old Beatles records too, and I borrowed them from her when I went through her collection, and she's got a mono copy of Something New, which is cool. So this is where, I get to hear like a version of And I Love Her that's not drenched in reverb. So I'm listening to side one, I'll Cry Instead. And my ears picked up something weird. Like, what? What's going on here? So after the first bridge, I'm gonna hide myself away. So when he comes back to hide all the girls, show you what your loving man's gonna do, and there's a descending bass line break, goes back to the first verse. I'm like, what? Because my ears are ready for it to go, back to that bridge thing and then out. So, like, whoa. So I had to A-B my stereo version with this mono version. And yeah, there's an extra verse in the mono version. So the timestamp on this record, on the song itself, is 2 minutes 4 seconds, right? So and that's correct. That's accurate. But I did a stopwatch on the stereo version. It's only like 1:45. But it's still stamped 2:09 everywhere on all those copies. So they were just like, the mono mix must have occurred first, and they just used that metadata for all the printed labels and all the, the printed jackets or whatever. They're in a hurry. They're not going to split hairs back then or correct that kind of thing. Let's talk about Please Please Me. So for years, I'd always heard that little goof, that screw up, in the third verse. And it was kind of like an affectionate thing. Kind of a neat little wart that humanized these gods. So what happens is John is singing, why do I never even try, girl? Paul is singing, I know you never even try, girl. So Paul is singing the correct line. John is getting confused he's kind of splicing the first and second verses, half of one. He's splicing the second verse first line onto the first verse second line. And they just let it slide. So it sounds a little terrible. The two on top of each other, like they don't know what they're doing. It exists in the stereo mix. And it might be a Lennon-esque self-reflective Freudian slip. Like he turns the question around to himself of, but I tend to think it's his tendency to ad-lib, like it famously at that 1957 Wilton Church Fete that Paul McCartney saw him on stage. And he puts in the line about the penitentiary and the Del Vikings come go with me. Probably because he forgot the lyrics to that song too. And then, from that very first early live performance up until he's on the roof at Abbey Road in 69, and that gloop, 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 nonsense. And I Don't Let Me Down. I think it was just his want to, you know, get lyrics wrong. Brilliant guy, but uh, maybe just gets a little brain farty. And, whereas Paul is on the ball. Paul, he's right on target. Um, he was the guy that knew how to play 20 Flight Rock and recite that mouthful of verses. There's a lot of stuff going on in that song about a corpse draped over a rail. You know, I've tried playing that song before too, and it's tricky to stay on target with those lyrics. Each verse is different. It's a pretty involved song about mechanical breakdown, elevators, and physical exertion to see one's baby. And there's other examples of Paul cramming a shitload of lyrics into like a short phrase, like in Fixing a Hole. People running around just don't know why they got in my door. I can't even say what he's saying in a hurry there, in his patter. And then there's, and I've got a feeling, he's like, blah, 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 a girl like you. So, I suppose if you read the lyrics, oh, that's what he's saying. But he's good at, cramming that stuff in together. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. So this mistake on the third verse of Please Please Me, this sloppy edit or whatever, it does not exist on the mono version of Please Please Me, which is on this record. And I don't have a copy of, the Parlophone Please Please Me album, which would be cool to own that in mono. But I'm guessing that this mistake happened on that side of the pond. I don't think they mixed anything. I think all they did on this side was remaster and throw in reverb and stuff. I don't think they got those master tapes. Somebody correct me. But my guess is they paid attention and put some effort into the mono mixes and then just rushed the stereo real sloppy. So I just don't get it. Why wouldn't they just keep the same version? These things I don't know. But I didn't know until recently that the goof doesn't exist on the mono. It's only on the stereo versions. And furthermore, that weird goof crosses over into print. So if we remember, on the Red album has these great inserts with the lyrics printed on them on the inner sleeves, those great red all cap italicized Times New Roman printed lyrics. So on the Please Please Me for that, you'll see a picture here. It says the third verse is printed, "Why do I never even try, girl?" So somebody tried to make sense of what the two guys are saying on top of each other and came up with, "Why do I never even try, girl?" Which doesn't even make sense. Last night I asked these words of my girl, "Why don't I ever even try, girl?" That's why I wouldn't say, "Why do I never even try, girl?" I would rephrase it, "Why don't I ever try, girl?" That would be just me. Anyway, it's redonkulous, but they just print the legend, right? And I thought, well, what does my complete Beatles sheet music say? I would think that maybe they would be a little more accurate. And that even gets weirder. So if you see the picture here, it says in the fifth bar printed, "I know you /I." Basically, they're saying it says, "I know I never even try, girl," instead of "Why do I never even try, girl?" So again, kind of mixing up. They're taking Paul's first two words and John's final five. So that's "I know I never even try, girl." That kind of makes a little more sense, I guess. Well, What happened? What happened was the my phone crashed in the middle of that shoot. So we're gonna wrap up our discussion on the "Please Please Me" deal. Different day, different outfit, magic. I was curious whether that lyric description had changed in the 40, 50 years since the Red album lyric sheet was printed, and that Milt Oaken complete Beatles songbook was published in 81 or whatever. So I Googled the lyrics nowadays, and they're correct. Just verse 1 and verse 2. Repeat verse 1. There's none of this I pronoun business getting switched around. So somewhere along the line, somebody realized how ridiculous the screw up was and just cleaned it up. And even on Beatles.com, they have lyrics to different songs. So that's the end of that chapter. And I wanted to so there'll be a part 2 of this vinyl thing because it went long, but I'm gonna finish out today with, we started out on this scattered episode talking about mono versus stereo and how my perceptions have changed, when the truth is I've loved mono all along and not known it. So earlier, that Songs, Picture Stories VJ record I always thought great, and I listened to it again recently and I was like, damn, stuff in mono can sound really three-dimensional. I just, my whole perception, my preconceived notions about mono was that it would sound flat and one-dimensional, and I'm completely wrong. People that know what they're doing, that mixed mono in the old days, there were certain examples of them doing it right. Another record that's like that was in mono all along. This is my first album that was given to me by my stepmom, Herman's on Tour. So it was a bit corny for her. Probably she outgrew it, after she was 15 in 1965. But I loved this album back in 78, and it was cool to have it. My very first album, I even wrote my name on it. You can see Gabe Millward. I went by Gabe back then because, everybody, all the kids in the 60s wrote their names on the albums. So I wanted my name to be on this. This sounds great to this day. It's really good, cool guitar sounds on this. It's corny pop, whatever, but it blows Jerry and the Pacemakers out of the water. These guys rock. Sorry, I'm going to die on that hill. So, a few other examples of something better in mono. And we're going back to, this is the very first album I purchased with my own money in 1983, was Hot Rocks, because I wanted to have a copy of something that contained Satisfaction. And I lost, there used to be a hype sticker that was, still remnants of it over the top. So I pulled this out and I was listening to it compared to this great compilation, High Tide. This is a mono copy, and it sounds way, way better than this early 80s or late 70s pressing with stereo stuff. This record sounded cool when I was a kid. It sounds like garbage now. It just sounds really muddy compared to, the mix. And this is an early pressing of High Tides from 66. Anyway, hands down, the better sound in mono, and just how it was mastered or something. This repress from Abco, it's got the stank of Alan Klein on it. All the records that were released after the Alan Klein Abco period seem to be kind of, I don't know, chintzy. But maybe Andrew Oldham was a shitty producer in the first place. It was no George Martin or Shel Tamley or whatever. I don't know. So Oh, look, this is like either the second record I bought when I was 12 years old, 11 years old. I loved Madness back then. And then we're getting way off topic here, but I just have to say, I still have one of these, the second record I ever bought. And then I bought One Step Beyond, and absolutely love those 3 records still to this day. So that should wrap it up for this episode. Maybe we'll close out with some humorous outtakes. Hello, welcome back to Work Truck Record Review, the Beatles episode. I didn't think we'd get here. A bit tedious, but what is it about the Beatles that makes them that we don't ever tire? What is it about the Beatles that we don't ever tire of them? That they're infinitely discoverable, endlessly. What is it about the Beatles? And why don't we ever tire of them? I don't know why. I don't know why they're endlessly discoverable and what makes them so appealing. In my new vinyl phase, in my rediscovered vinyl phase, I thought I'd share, just because that's what guys do. Talk about the Beatles.